Welcome, and Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And I'm glad some of you enjoyed the foray into the Mishneh Torah. There's just so much. They just, it's like there's not enough hours in the day and enough personal energy to do everything, and a mind that can absorb all these things, except these rare individuals who are just so brilliant. So we're going to go back into the brilliance of the Torah and the brilliance of Rashi in explaining it, and maybe a little bit of Torah Tamima. Just the enjoyment that people have had in analyzing these words. So Moses, of course, continuing to speak to the Jewish people, to the Israelites assembled prior to his own demise, trying to leave them an ethical will. So he goes on to say to them, Einechem haruot, it is your eyes that have seen Et asher asa Hashem ba'al Peor, that which God did to Baal Peor. And of course, again, referring to that very sad moment after God has prevented Bilam from cursing the Jewish people, unfortunately, being the ability of the Jewish men, to shoot themselves in the foot and to go whoring after the Moabite women and to get seduced into actually worshiping Baal Peor, this idol of the Moabites. And of course, I think it was 24,000 of them that are killed. And that's what Moses is referring to right here. So he says, Ki kol ha'ish asher halach acharei Baal Peor, because every man who went after, in other words, who followed Baal Peor, Hishmido Hashem Elokecha mikirbecha. The Lord your God has destroyed him from your midst. So we really do have choices, right? Incidentally, the whole notion of Baal Peor, this name Baal Peor, has connotations of lewdness and disgust and stuff like that. So anyway, going on. And these are the words that we say every time we take the Torah out and before we read it. Va'atem hadvekim, but you who cleave or cling, Badonai Elohechem, but the Lord your God, Chayim kulchem hayom. You are alive, you are all alive today. And this taking very seriously, of course, which I know at this point you are all very aware of, how seriously we take this notion of the Torah and its laws, and studying it and understanding it and making it a very central part of our very DNA. So anyway, whenever I read this verse, if I may share with you personally, I think of my father, because my dad loved this verse. He did. And there's 7 words in this verse, and he used this verse to count the number of wraparounds on his arm tefillin, as when you wrap the tefillin around your arm. 7 words. Let's see. Re'eh. See. Limadati etchem chukim umishpatim. I have taught you statutes and laws, ka'asher tzivani Adonai Elohai, as the Lord my God has commanded me. La'asot kain, to perform this, to do this, bekerev haaretz, in the midst of the land, asher atem ba'im shama l'rishta, in which you are coming there to inherit. So again, it's not just simply some kind of nationalistic desire or whatever. There's a purpose to this, having to do with the idea of human beings, certainly in this case, the Jewish people, personally and collectively performing the divine will. That here in the world, in this reality in which we live, there's a sense in which the divine word has an influence in a very deep kind of way, and to be able to do it in this particular place. Ushmartim, and you shall guard, v'asitim, and you shall, or guard them, and you shall perform them. Kihi chochmatchem uvinatchem, because it is, I'd have to add parenthetically, the source of your wisdom and your understanding. Le'enei ha'amim, in the eyes of the nations. In other words, in other people. He's going to expand on this idea that other nations are going to see the example that the Jewish people set. Asher yishma'un et kol ha'chokim ha'ele, in that they will hear all these statutes for Amru, and they're going to say, in other words, we know Amar mean think, right? Rak am chacham v'navon. So literally, rak just usually means only, right? But I think we just have to, for English, we'd say how or what a wise chacham and understanding, or what a wise nation and understanding nation, Hagoy Hagadol Hazeh, this great nation. Yes?
I was just going to look at the Targum. It says lechod am chakim.
Yes.
Lechod, I don't know. In Aramaic, I don't know, but
it means only. It means like right. In other words, they alone, something like that.
Yeah.
This great nation is the only great nation. In other words, again, the idea of this special position that the Jewish people have. But I mean, again, I like to hesitate over stuff that sounds like it's growing on a little level. But I think on the other hand, he's speaking, I don't think it's too different that when you're a grandparent, you know that your grandchildren are brilliant and beautiful, and so it's a loving statement as well.
Or you could say it's a statement of praise to the lawgiver, the laws.
Absolutely.
In other words, these people living by these laws is not that they're innately wonderful, but that they're abiding by very wise laws.
Yes, all that. All that. Let's see if there's a Rashi on this, because I think there may be. Okay, right, here we are, right? So it's lovely. I love the way Rashi is so sensitive to not letting us get away with generalities and trying to put some groundwork to these generalities. Ushmartem. So I believe Ushmartem has, in fact, the pronoun "you shall guard them." Okay, and the reason why is that the fact that it says Ushmartem, like it's saying Ushamartem otam, right? You shall guard them, and he says this refers to Mishnah. Now, of course, we do have Mishnah, but I believe that he's saying here is learning. So ushmartem, which literally means you shall guard them, it means studying. It means Talmud Torah, right? Because the word Mishnah itself means learning, whereas Torah means teaching, right? So the idea of Mishnah, of learning the Torah, it's a two-way street. Va'asitim, and the word va'asitim, kemashma'o, means just as it sounds. In other words, you'll study them and then you'll practice them. You can't practice them if you haven't studied them to begin with. So that's how he's linking these two words together. Ki hu chochmatchem, it's actually ki hi chochmat for she is your wisdom, uvinatchem. I love the way wisdom is understood as feminine. Okay, it's and your understanding. So, etc. Bezot techashvu chachamim unevonim. So he's explaining through this you will be considered wise and understanding la'einei ha'amim in the eyes of the nations. Again, think about it. It's leading by example. What a powerful, if not obvious, concept, right? Going on. Kimi goy gadol, for who is? So Moses is following up his thought. He says, for in this case, me usually means who. I guess we would say what in English. For what great nation? Okay, or is there a nation as great? Asher lo Elohim krovim elav, which to him, literally, I'm going to translate this word for word, right? Which to him, God is close to him, right? So what nation has a God so close to them? Kadonai Eloheinu, as the Lord our God. B'chol korenu, whenever we call Elav, whenever we call upon him. And of course, I know for me personally, these words have traction. These words have traction. And they, reading this material and recognizing its age and its power and its influence, I've tried to be open to exactly that. But I will tell you that, knowing to some extent the degree to which one can, in fact, cling to God by performing mitzvot, I realize how far short I come from doing that. But my sense is that it has more to do with direction than looking back and saying, oh gosh, I performed all these mitzvahs. It's a process. It's a process. Umi goy gadol, and what great nation, Asher lo chukim. These are what the nations are saying, right? Who have chukim umishpatim, statutes and ordinances, tzadikim, righteous, kachol haTorah hazat, like this entire Torah. Asher anochi noten lifnechem hayom, which I am placing before you today. So Rashi talks about, what do we mean by righteous statutes and ordinances, right? Chukim umishpatim tzadikim. And he simply says, what it means is hagunim, they are worthy concepts, umakubalim, and they're acceptable ideas. And again, when it says kol haTorah, right, the entire Torah, for me, that means two things. One is that you can't pick and choose necessarily. And those parts of the Torah, which, as you already know, I find difficulty, I try to understand it in a broader context and to try and find interpretations that make sense to me and that are consistent with my understanding of God's love of humanity. Rak hishamer lacha, but he says only be careful, take warning, right? Ushmor nafshecha ma'od, and be very diligent, right, in guarding literally it means your soul, but it can mean also simply in guarding yourselves. Only be careful, be careful. Pen tishkach, lest you forget et hadvarim, the words, asher ra'u, or the things, right? The things, the experiences, asher ra'u einecha, which your own eyes have seen. Upen yasuru milvavcha, and lest they turn away from your hearts. This kol yemei chayecha, all the days of your life. In other words, at some point, to be constantly vigilant, to make sure you don't forget these particular things. So you look at the Seder, for example, Pesach, how we go over these things and we try to remember the past and we try to learn from the past and we try to show appreciation that our lives in so many ways are a reflection of the appreciation that we have, right? Mitzrayim galtanu, right? From Egypt you redeemed us. And looking down through our own history at the fact that here we are still existing as a Jewish people and giving God appreciation for that and it being using that to strengthen our own commitment to performing divine will. V'hodatam levanecha, you shall make them known to your children, ulivnei vanecha, and your grandchildren. Let's take a look here. Sorry. Let's see. Yeah. So there's this Rashi here going back. Okay. Rak hishamer lecha, right? Only be very careful, right? Be on warning. Pen tishchach et hadvarim, lest you forget these things. Az keshelo tishkachu otam, so that, right, when you don't forget them, if you don't forget them, the ta'asum al emtatam, and you try to do them emtatam, emet, truth, right, as sincerely, right, or in the fullest sense, right, techashvu chachamim. In that case, right, you will be considered wise, unelavonim, and understanding. Ve'im ta'avtu otam, but if you pervert them, mitoch shicha, because, in other words, through forgetfulness, through forgetting them, techashvu shotim, you will be considered fools. So, again, the Sifrei, I'm sure, Rashi's getting this from, but saying, that's the force of the rock. In other words, only if you don't forget these things, only if you are very meticulous about and forthcoming about doing these things. It isn't lip service, right? Yom Asher, referring specifically to the day Asher Amadata, the day in which you stood, Lifnei Adonai Elokecha, before the Lord your God, Bechorev, at Chorev, and we know that Chorev refers to Mount Sinai. Be'emor Hashem Elai, when Hashem said to me, Hakheli et ha'am, gather for me the nation, va'ashmi'em et dvarai, and I will cause them to hear my words, asher yilmadun, so that they learn le'ir'a oti kol hayamim, to fear me all the days, asher hem chayim ala adama, all the days which they live or they endure on the earth. Ve'et b'neihem yilamedum, and they will also teach them to their children. So, we've talked about this concept of being God-fearing, and how what it means is that we take God very seriously. We don't. We look at this stuff, and we try to look at it and see what we can do. Very seriously about it and take seriously the words that are given to us, right? Yom Asher Amadata, the day in which you stood, he says, Musav al Mikra Shelamala Mimenu. This verse actually depends on a verse that occurred much earlier on. And that's the verse that it says, Asher Ra'u Einecha, which your eyes saw. So this material here, right? Okay. is here is a parenthetical, and I believe we actually go up here. Let's see, when he says the day that that you saw, and let's take a look. Let's go look at all the way back. I believe. Excuse me. Nope. Maybe I thought he was going back. Let's see. Maybe even further. Nope. Okay. So that's what he's saying. It's got to do with that part. What you saw. And but I believe this area here is parenthetical to saying, think back on that time at that time, right? Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So this right. Okay. So he is saying it's referring to this. Forgive me. Again, this every time, every lesson, there is some area where I have to go back and look carefully and correct myself. So here. So this is the Asherah Ueinecha, right? And this here is parenthetical, and he's going back. And what Rashi's telling us is this is going back to that previous section, right? Yom Asher Amadata B'Chorev. In other words, that day, look back at that day when you stood at Mount Sinai at Chorev. Asher Ra'ita et HaKolot ve'et HaLapidim, where you saw the voices and the lapid is like the torches, right? Remember, the mountain was on fire. There were these loud sounds. If you recollect, at some other point reading about the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and what a scary moment it was in many ways, right? So he says, right, Yilmadun, Yalfun, this is the Hebrew, the Aramaic, Yilfun la'atzmam, in other words, learn for yourselves, Yilamedun Ya'alfun la'acherim, and that's to teach. So it's interesting that in Hebrew, right, the words for learn and teach are related here. So here we go. Asher Yilmadun, right, so that you learn, and then Yilamedun, right? Ve'et bneihem Yilamedun. It's called a different binyan, right? This, I believe, is a kal. It's called the simple, literally, okay? And this is Yilamed is I think it's a PL form, an intensive form, but in this sense, it is a causative form. Going on. Vatikravun v'ta'amdun tachat ha'ar, and you drew near, and you stood at the foot of the mountain. Literally, it means under the mountain, right? V'hahar bo'er ba'esh, and the mountain was burning with fire ad leif hashamayim, to the very heart of heaven. Choshech, darkness, anan, cloud, v'arafel, and mist, fog, describing what it was like. And my feeling is in reading these particular descriptions, I believe they are trying to awaken within us feelings. In other words, asking ourselves, how would you feel if you were experiencing this all around you? And I also suspect that they are trying to give us an association of how powerful this really is, and how significant and how life influencing this all is, the power that it has to affect our lives and our feelings and our thoughts, etc. Vaidaber Hashem Alechem mitoch ha'esh, and the Lord spoke to you from the midst of the fire. Kol dvarim atem shomim, the sound of words you hear or you heard, right? Utmuna einchem ro'im, but you did not see any picture. You don't see any likeness. Zulati kol, only a voice. And of course, the idea of not worshiping any physical images or physical things. Vayaged lachem, and it was, or he told you, et brito, his covenant, asher tziva etchem lasot, which he commanded you to perform. So again, this idea of a brit is an agreement. It is a relationship. It is a quid pro quo, and it's saying, right, that there is this relationship essentially that we are trying to establish, that our tradition speaks of and takes quite seriously all the way back to this particular moment. Aseret hadvarim, the 10 words. Vayichtavem, and he wrote them. Al shnei luchot, on 2 tablets. Avanim, of stone. So again, going on. V'oti tziva Hashem, and for me, Hashem commanded ba'et hahi, at that time, lelamed etchem, to teach you, chukim umishpatim, right, statutes and ordinances, la'asotchem otam, for you to practice, right, to do them. Ba'aretz, in the land, asher atem ovrim shama l'rishta, which you are crossing over there to inherit. Rashi, v'oti tziva Hashem ba'et hahi lelamed etchem, and the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you. And he says this refers to the Torah Sheba'al Peh. This refers to the oral Torah. And by oral Torah, we should understand that essentially means applied Torah. So the reason is that they heard these words, and you had that element of the Torah, which is understood as the written Torah, and the fact that Moses is commanded to teach the Israelites to do them, right? To practice them. And that's the nature of applied Torah. And our understanding that there's theoretical Torah, and then there's applied Torah. And you start off, learning theoretical Torah, and then you try to apply that Torah. All right. David, if you're still there, I'd like to do this in memory of your grandmother. Okay.
He is not here.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sorry he left already. Okay. And it is 8 o'clock, at least at Pacific time. Okay. Okay. We're going to have to stop here, I'm afraid, for this year. And of course, he is developing his encouraging the Jewish people. This is the very nature of a ethical will, right? To try and make sure that the future generations are ethical and that they think about these values, etc., etc. So I'll stop here, and I'll stop the share. If anyone wants to say anything before I close the recording, any comments, any reaction? Yeah.
I say the Shema when I wake up in the morning and when I go to sleep at night.
Yes.
But there's a lot of times I don't even say the prayers after meal. And I don't know, maybe the Lord says, if you don't say the prayers after meal, that's a no-no. I mean, there's a lot of times I don't say all the prayers, all the mitzvahs, and I feel guilty about it. But that's the only thing.
Well,
You do the best you can. that's what's really the most important thing. And you try to do better the next day.
Okay.
That's what I tell kids.
Well, this is what I was saying before. By the way, before I say that, I have to quote Garrison Keillor and his statement, guilt, the gift that keeps on giving. So at any rate, Harlan, this is what I mean by talking about direction, okay? You have to be careful, only because if you keep trying to do every single thing, it can become mechanical, and you don't want it to become mechanical. Now, I'm not trying to look for excuses, but flagellation, self-flagellation only goes so far. And Golda is right in that it's the only useful piece about it is the degree to which it encourages you and helps you to try and do what you can do. All right. Sometimes you can have a desire to do everything, but I don't think the idea is for it to become mechanical. Although even then, I'm going to say that in some cases, if you can't do better than being mechanical, that's better than nothing. Okay. Like in some cases, not in everything, but it really has to do with the general direction in which you're going. So much of it depends on the society in which you're living and the culture. And but the point is, here we are. We're studying. That's why studying Torah is keneged kulam. It is worth everything, and we're doing the best we can. I mean, believe me, I'm right where you are in terms of my sense of not doing enough, but you do what you can do. And I think, you should hear what Golda says and do the best you can.
But isn't it true that if you're eating a meal, but it doesn't include bread and you haven't said motzi, you don't have to do birkat. I mean, you're not obligated to do birkat, right? I mean,
So,
but it's fine if you do, but if you're not
No,
obligated.
There's a different bracha, like there's a brachot achronot,
That's
for
true.
other things.
Right.
You anticipated my answer, Shira. In fact, I don't
Right.
know that you should do Birkat Hamazon, frankly, if you haven't had bread. All
Right.
right. I mean, knowing what the proper response is important. So there's a difference between baked goods and bread. Okay. And there's a Me'ain Shalosh, there's a sort of very abbreviated version of Birkat Hamazon that you recite after eating baked goods, not bread. And then if you don't eat baked goods, there's a very short one line, basically thanking God for creating appetites within us, which allow us to survive. That we recognize that those appetites are there because if we didn't have them, we wouldn't survive. So again, how mindful can you be and memorizing these particular brachot, etc. You need to have, some common sense, I suppose, to say, as you try to develop these particular things. So I'm going to stop the recording here.
Yep.